big.
I haven't had a shower in 28 days. And it's fair to say that nobody executes a sponge bath quite the way that I do. I've earned my black belt and a PhD in the ancient art of sponge bathery. Tomorrow's job, bucket laundry. Is my plumbing broken? Is my bathroom being renovated? No, this is about me using my voice. And this is about those who have no choice. And the reason I do this is to make you think. How much water was used when you were last at the kitchen sink? And between your ingrained habits and the taxes you pay and the energy used to pump sacred life into your home through subterranean water highways, between all of these things, can you make a link? 25 liters a day is all I'm allowed. This manic month of scribbling and jotting, I am the calorie counter of the water world. And now I realize with the sharp clarity and the unstoppable compulsion of somebody who's rapidly losing her footing in the crumbling sandstone on the brink of an OCD chasm, why diets never work. I want to etch on your minds with a water-based ink. And I want you all to be thinking about how much water you use and how much you abuse. I've been labeled alarmist, a dirty hippie, and more. Labeled crazy by those who can't add up the score. Now, as I heat up bathing water, I can almost feel the sleek ribbons of cascading warmth, soon to be delivered by my trusty yogurt container. This sponge bath is earned, and I'll enjoy it more than ever before that I've reached out and turned on that shower dial. So I'm up the stairs with my bucket. I'm careful not to slop. I can't afford to waste a single drop. Into the bathroom, ready to go with my luxury steaming H2. Oh, no! Tragedy has struck. In my haste, I have stumbled and spilled my bucket. I watched my efforts drain away. Blue gold on porcelain in the bottom of the tub. And now I must walk downstairs, measure out more water, and return to the stove with it. Novelty's worn off, and at this stage, I am over it. Still, I walk down 16 stairs, and it sure as hell beats 16 miles. From a sun-baked village on a dusty road, a woman with a jug on her head she goes, and where this woman she goes, she walks with her hopes, and she wonders if anyone hears her story. In 3 short days, my stand of solidarity comes to an end. But I will not forget. Her story echoes in each drip of a leaky shower head, in every careless flush. The weight of her clay jug sits on my shoulders each time I see somebody turn their back on a running tap. Tomorrow's wars won't be fought over a thirst for oil, but over thirst in and of itself. With 3 days to go, I'm struck by the irony that water makes up 70% of my body. So when the well runs dry and our fields turn to dust, I wonder, will they be coming to claim me? Thank you. So I didn't always like poetry. In fact, in high school, I pretty much hated poetry. I found it boring, tedious, and more often than not, the subject matter totally irrelevant to my life. What I did love was telling stories to anyone who would listen. On school camps, I would make these shadow puppets on the walls of a tent with a torch. I called them Bob and Mary. And I would tell all my classmates these elaborate stories about their crazy adventures. Now, while all of this might seem a bit pointless and silly, what I was really doing was developing a lifelong passion and laying the groundwork for a realization much later on that we all have stories that just beg to be told, need to be told. Through storytelling, when we share our joys and our triumphs, we invite others to celebrate in our joy alongside us. When we make ourselves vulnerable, sharing our fears or our sorrows, then we validate those feelings in others. I like to think of our stories as ever-thickening cords that bind us together. Every new experience, every conversation, every new move weave new threads into a collective story rope. So I want you to all start thinking, what's your story? 4 years ago, 3 catalysts came together in my life to form a perfect storm for story creation. I was smack bang in the middle of prairie Canada, both physically and figuratively, thousands of kilometers from home. Now, if you ever want to experience the utter confusion and the social discomfort of feeling like an awkward, clumsy teenager all over again, at the same time as having the outward appearance of a cool and confident 28-year-old woman, then I can highly recommend coming out of the closet as an adult in a foreign country. Suddenly I had all of these old stories about myself and my identity to just put aside. And I was creating new ones daily about trying to navigate this new landscape in my attempts to relate and connect with a whole new gender. To borrow a few lines from the poem I wrote about it, it's taken for granted their years of practice. They are all comfortable in their language, while I struggle with night classes in order to catch up. Secondly, I started going along to a weekly poetry evening in a bar in Saskatoon. And what I found was an intensely rich connection. The first night, I was reduced to tears by a man on stage sharing the anguish at the loss of his would-be first child to his wife's recent miscarriage. The next woman spoke of her younger years, where life circumstances had taken her down a road to prostitution. They weren't all sad stories. The very next poet on stage shared a hilarious piece questioning the audience on their bum-wiping technique. But no matter what the subject of the poem, the underlying theme was that these were all real and raw examples of the human experience. In particular, I loved the poetry slams. Every last Sunday of the month, we would hold these performance poetry competitions where each poet gets 3 minutes at the microphone to impress the audience and 5 randomly selected audience judges spread throughout the bar. So here were people not just sharing their stories, but doing so with the full knowledge that they would have their soul-bearing cruelly judged by 5 strangers afterwards. This extraordinary act of bravery made their words all the more powerful. And the third catalyst for me was a realization of the power of storytelling to encourage positive behavior change. At the time, I was working for an environmental non-profit organization. And part of my job was to deliver these rather fact-heavy presentations to schools and community groups, encouraging them to conserve water. And then in March 2010, I put myself on this extreme month-long water conservation challenge, and I first clambered onto that poetry stage, an absolute nervous wreck, to perform the poem that you just heard to a crowd of about 100 people. And a few weeks later, I was walking down the street, and this woman in a pricey-looking pinstripe business suit approached me, and she told me that she had heard my poem, and she had since started having shorter showers. This was not an isolated incident. I had a friend who would tell me every time he saw me of these new ways he was coming up with to save water. It was incredible. I'd had more of an impact in 3 minutes by just telling my story than any number of fancy presentations had achieved. I'd accidentally discovered what all good marketers know: the power of crafting an engaging narrative. None of this is new, exactly. Indigenous cultures have always recognized and celebrated the power of storytelling. And before Europeans came to New Zealand shores, te reo Māori existed only as a spoken language, relying heavily upon the oral transfer of histories. But in most Western cultures, oral traditions have taken a back seat in recent decades. When I first began to host weekly poetry shows in in Wellington early last year, it was a real struggle just even to get my friends to come along. Their eyes would glaze over at the mere mention of the word poetry. And little wonder when in our schools poetry has been taught off the page rather than spoken from the heart. Now, almost every friend that does eventually come along to a poetry slam or an open mic evening gets drawn in by the story, and they're lured back time and again. And because the audience is just as much a part of a poetry slam as the poet on stage, then every person becomes a participating member in the give and take nature of our storytelling community. The founder of Poetry Slam, Mark Kelly Smith, said it best when he said, "Slam is more than just a competition. It is a global, social, literary movement." The way we communicate with each other is becoming increasingly fast-paced and impersonal. In this age of instant information and never-ending screens, it's more important than ever that we share our stories, combine the strands of our story rope, and just take the time to be human together. This is not a call to arms. This is a call to hands who no longer carve stories from bones and boughs. This is a call to lips who've relied on lip service for far too long. This is not a test. This is but a simple request. This is an emergency beacon, flashing amongst crashing waves of cell phone rings, competing demands, tightening purse strings, 5 a.m. alarms. This is not a call to arms. For war metaphors grow weary in a world that just wants to hear an empowering story. This is a wake-up call to awakening minds and softening hearts, to those who will simply not accept that this is the way things are. This is a call to all who refuse to accept a call to arms. Your stories are stirring. They're ready to fly, but only you know the view from behind your eyes. So gather, my friends, let your voices rise, and tell me, what's your story? Thank you. Thanks very much.